Hi, Dr. Clark here again. Animal biology today. We're going to finish up talking about annelids, okay, with the class Clitellates or Clitellata. Okay. Now, the Clitellates have this unique structure right here and right here called the clitellum. This is a region that gonads are associated with, so sperm and egg will be associated with this, along with the shell that goes over the egg, or the cocoon that the egg is encased in. Okay? And so we talked about the polychaetes, the marine worms. Today we're going to talk about the clitellates, okay, which includes the earthworms, the terrestrial worms. Okay. All right, so the first group that I want to talk about is the oligochaetes, which are the earthworms. Okay? So again, this used to be known as the class Oligochaeta. Now it's known as a subclass. The class is the clitellates. Okay? But nonetheless, in your lifetime, it might go back to being the class Oligochaetes. But right now, we're going to learn it as a subclass. Oligochaetes, there are about 3,000 species of earthworms worldwide. They can occur in freshwater or terrestrial habitats, so there are aquatic oligochaetes. They have some external structures which are important. Okay? They have setae, okay? But the setae are not as advanced as the setae that we see in the polychaetes that tip their parapoda. These guys don't have any parapoda, so the setae are right on the epidermal, normally on the ventral side of the organism, okay, at the edge of, embedded in the epidermal cells. Okay? And then, like I said, what distinguishes them into this class is the clitellum, that region that occurs that I showed you just a second, okay? And that is a region that's associated with copulation, reproduction, and cocoon formation. So here you can see the structure of an earthworm. Most of you are fairly familiar with it. Okay, so you have a prostomium, this kind of like a proboscis region, the head region of the organism. Some of them will have sensory associated with this. Again, the mouth of the organism, the clitellum, their kind of reproductive cocoon-making region. Setae are these little teeny hair-like structures that occur on the ventral side of the organism, especially in the earthworm case, and then the anus. Most of you have probably felt setae before. If you take and run your hand in the reverse direction from the posterior to the anterior side, you'll feel the setae. The setae are actually kind of pointed towards the posterior end, so you'll feel kind of a rough or kind of pokiness to the organism as you run your hand the opposite direction. If you run it in this direction, anterior to posterior, it should be smooth and whatnot, but the opposite direction is kind of rough. Okay, so locomotion is a little bit different in oligochaetes than we saw in polychaetes, in the sense that there's no parapoda, so they're not firing muscle on each side independent. Instead, the muscles are in a circular ring, so they can fire each ring independent, okay, which will cause the organism to kind of snake through the environment, or extend its body through the environment. So it's a little bit different than gastropods, which were moving in waves. Now we're talking about muscle rings, but these rings can fire independent of one another because they occur in the segments of the body, the different segmental regions of the body. Okay? So they have the capability of burrowing, so both freshwater and terrestrial oligochaetes burrow. Okay? And they have this capability of increasing the hydrostatic pressure, okay, to push their way through the soil. And most of you have probably experienced this before. If you've ever tried to pull a worm out of the ground, what they'll do is they will constrict regions of their body and close off the segment and then fill a column with water or hydrostatic pressure to fill themselves and make themselves as large as possible. The setae will get stuck into the sediment and then it'll be very difficult to move or remove that organism. It's actually a very good defense mechanism because if you pull on that worm hard enough, you'll break it in two. And they have the capability of regenerating their body parts. So instead of being, dead and pulled out of the ground and consume the entire individual, you broke it in half and it will regenerate the rest of its body and still live to see another day. Okay. So here you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Inside caverns or inside, an actual tunnel, the organism has the ability to contract ring muscles, okay? And it can do so throughout the body. So it can contract rings and then it can relax rings. And so by doing that, it pushes its body through a sediment or through a water column or whatnot. Okay? Feeding, okay, most of these are detritivores, so they're scavengers. They eat decaying material. It can be animal material, but majority of the time they're eating the dead, decaying vegetation. Their digestive system is very, very similar to polychaetes, so we'll just go over that real quick. So they got a mouth. Mouth enters into kind of the pharynx. They have a buccal cavity, which does have digestive enzymes associated with it in majority of the organisms. The pharynx gives rise to the crop. Okay, the crop gives rise to the gizzard. The gizzard gives rise to the intestines. Okay. And along here you might have regions in which you have digestive enzymes that would come into play before you get into the crop. But the crop main job is to grind. The gizzard's main job is to add digestive enzymes and churn up the material, and then the intestines are to remove the nutrients from the body. Okay, you can see here they have, majority of the time, they have a 5-heart system. Okay, again, like I said, it's in unison. Okay, so it's not as if this heart controls, one region or this heart controls another region. They pump into each other to create enough pressure to move the blood throughout the entire organism. Okay? Again, no lungs, no gills, all oh my goodness, gas exchange, sorry. All gas exchange is occurring across the body wall, and that's mainly why worms, oligochaetes, even the terrestrial version, have to be in moist environments because they need that moisture to create that or eliminate that barrier between the epidermis and the internal structures to pick up the oxygen. Okay, so gas exchange, I just talked about it. Diffusion across the body wall, okay, it needs to be moist. Circulation is a closed circulatory system. Okay. We start to see respiratory pigments. Okay, so the blood itself has respiratory pigments, and so this is a little bit different, but diverging into more advanced systems. Dorsal aorta, ventral aorta, they both can contract. Okay, there's a 5-heart system in most of the organisms, so they have this ability to pump blood through many chambers in order to create enough pressure to move the blood through the entire organism. Just like polychaetes, you have vessels and capillaries which are associated with both the intestine and the body wall. So the body wall for gas exchange, the intestine for nutrient exchange, okay? And then again, like I said before, they have multiple hearts, which are basically just multiple chambers, which increase the pressure and can pump blood from one region of the body to the next. The nervous system is very similar to polychaetes. They have a double ventral nerve. They have a suprapharyngeal ganglion, which controls the head region of the organism. Okay? But sensory, they do not have well-developed eyes, and in many cases they have no eyes, but they have light sensing, I guess you could say, spots or dermal regions which can sense light. Okay, so most oligochaetes present with what we call negative phototaxis. They can sense light and they move away from light. So even oligochaetes that occur in aquatic environments, freshwater environments, are still moving away from the light. Okay, so they don't have technical eyes. They're not, I mean, vision is very poor in the sense that the only capability is for them to sense which way the light is coming from, and most of the time they're moving away from it. But instead of having well-developed eyes, they have well-developed chemoreceptors, okay, and mechanoreceptors. So oligochaetes are often used in environmental research, environmental studies, whether or not ground contamination is a big deal in a certain region, whether or not you have to reclaim the land. If the land is polluted, how much material needs to be removed, etc. Worms, oligochaetes, have been used in these studies for a long time because they have excellent chemoreceptors and they can associate, or they're associated with, picking up chemicals that might be trace chemicals that might be found in the soil. Mechanoreceptors, again, these are receptors that are going to occur on the outer epidermis of the organism, and they can feel touch and sensation, and they can feel vibrations through the soil. So this is why, like, if you've ever tried to capture worms, okay, you'll be walking on the soil or whatnot, and the worm will sense your foot vibrations before you even get to them. Okay, so they're not seeing you. They don't have vision, like they're not seeing you coming, but they can sense the vibrations of the soil, and they know that you're moving in their direction, so they'll leave. Reproduction and development, okay, in the case of oligochaetes, mainly because they're terrestrial organisms, so most likely they went polychaetes to oligochaetes on the land, and then the oligochaetes that were on the land went into the freshwater environment, because the freshwater oligochaetes are also monoecious. So monoecious, in which they house sperm and egg in the same individual, okay? But again, they do not fertilize their own eggs. So they exchange sperm between two individuals. Okay? The sperm itself is exchanged through copulation. So the clitellum will be associated with the region, the seminal vesicle. Okay? And so the seminal vesicle will deposit sperm into the clitellum, into the ovary deposit, or sometimes called the sperm capsule, okay, and then that sperm can be utilized to fertilize the eggs. Okay, again, fertilization occurs in kind of a mucous or mucus frothy kind of situation where the sperm can move freely, encounter the egg is fertilized, and then that mucus is allowed to kind of harden, or it does harden, I shouldn't say allow, it hardens and forms a shell or a cocoon. That cocoon is deposited in the soil, okay, and then you get either spiral cleavage and direct development. Okay. So here you can see what I was talking about. So you got these seminal vesicles. These are going to develop the sperm. The sperm is going to excrete or be excreted through the testes into, okay, the seminal receptacles, okay, or capsules, sperm capsules, which house the sperm, hold the sperm until the eggs are ready. The eggs are then fertilized, okay, and then you get this passing of the eggs into, okay, the clitellum. This is the clitellum region, and that mucus will be wrapped or kind of mucus wrapped eggs, fertilized eggs, will occur into a cocoon. All right, now there's another group in the clitellates, the class Clitellata, okay, and that's the Hirudinea group. Now, it used to be that they're their own class also, and the Hirudinea are the leeches. Okay? Now, not very species rich. Okay? Only about 500 species of leeches described to date in the world. Okay? Most of them are freshwater, and they have some external structures that are unique to them. Okay? They, again, like oligochaetes, they lack parapoda. Okay? Now, they also lack setae. They lack the little hairs. Now, there are a few species that still have them, okay? But majority of them lack the setae. Their body is divided in annuli. It's a little bit different than the segments that we see in oligochaetes. Okay? And on top of that, they have an anterior and posterior sucker. Okay? And so most people know that Hirudinea, the leeches, are parasites. So here's that anterior sucker, okay, which is going to have a proboscis associated with it, which allows for the organism to rasp away a hole in another organism. And they can use that salivary gland. The salivary gland is going to have an anticoagulant, okay, that is injected into the organism that they're going to take a blood meal from. The blood is going to then come in, and the material is going to be digested. They do have a crop, but they're missing a gizzard. Okay? So they do have a crop which allows for some churning and digestion to occur, but digestion is pretty simple in leeches given that their meal is blood. Okay? Same kind of setup as you see in oligochaetes with male and female parts. They're monoecious. The one thing that is a little bit different is that in Hirudinea, the clitellum only shows up during reproductive periods. So if you pick up a leech, if it's reproductively active, and so it's actually going through reproduction, and it's maturing sperm and maturing eggs, etc., then you'll see the clitellum region. If it's outside of the reproductive season, the clitellum region is absent. Okay? And that's important because that's what kind of links leeches and oligochaetes, Hirudinea and oligochaetes, into the Clitellata. Okay? But as most students will note, when you look at a leech, you're probably not going to see the clitella or the clitellum. Okay? So again, locomotion, a little bit different than oligochaetes, but still in the same premise. There is no septa, okay? There is no parapoda, but now the muscles can be fired in kind of a offset loop or an offset ring, which will cause the organism to undulate through the water. And so it kind of twists its body as it swims through the water. And it's a little bit different. Feeding and digestion, again, they prey upon mainly blood of vertebrates, but they will consume some invertebrate material. Okay? They have that proboscis, which I talked about before, which has kind of a 3-jaw system or biting mouth parts, which will allow for them to penetrate the flesh of the organism. They're going to pump in anticoagulant material, so their saliva is anticoagulant, and then they suck out the body fluids, and they pump that material into their body. Nervous system, sensory system. Okay, so it's pretty much similar to the other annelids: suprapharyngeal ganglion, double nerve cord, segmental subganglion, Now, the ventral nerve cord and Hirudinea are infused. Okay, so it's a little bit different, but it's kind of the same premise. They have two nerve cords; they're just infused together. Okay? Um, Again, like oligochaetes, no real eyes. Okay, but instead they have photoreceptors. They are also negatively phototaxic, so they move away from the light. And you start to see these cups of photoreceptors. So it's like they um, started to develop eyes. The same kind of cups we see in Acelomorpha, or the flatworms, tubularians. Okay, um, same kind of cups with photoreceptors. It's mainly just to see shadows and detect light. The other thing that they have the capability of doing, at least some species in Hirudinea, okay, is they can sense the temperature of mammals. So they have temperature sensing organs, okay, and so they know when a mammal is in the water column, and they can seek out that change in temperature around that organism and then take a blood meal. Reproduction, like I said before, they're monoecious. They sexually reproduce only. The clitellum is only present during breeding, okay, and they copulate just like oligochaetes, okay. But one added piece, because they only can reproduce sexually, they have an extension, okay, which we call a penis, okay, that aids in that sperm transfer. So instead of the sperm just transferring from the spermal vessel into the sperm receptor, okay, they have a penis that actually attaches from one individual to the next and transfers the sperm into the sperm receptor. All right, like I said before, annelids, the whole phyla is getting revisited, okay? And so there is going through a massive amount of revisions currently, and that's due to typically genetic studies and also the fact that we're looking at other things than just morphology. We're starting to look at physiology and some fossil evidence. Okay, the phyla, we're trying to get them into a monophyletic phylum. Okay, Oligochaetes right now are paraphyletic, and so the current preference, I guess, from the scientific community would be to get rid of Oligochaetes and abandon that class name and develop a new class or multiple classes because they're paraphyletic. And so there's some other groups that sit out there that we need to talk about, include, okay, in the consideration of annelids, and that's Euchira, Siboglinidae, Spicuncula, okay. Clitellates evolved, like I said before, from an ancestor polychaete that invaded fresh water. So moved from the marine environment into the freshwater environment, okay? And then Hirudinea, the leeches derived from aquatic oligochaetes, okay? So you got this progression. We know at least some of the phylogenetic connections, some of the evolutionary connections between polychaetes, oligochaetes, and Hirudinea, okay? But again, we're also missing some other groups. Oligochaetes are a paraphyletic group which needs to be revisited, so the taxonomic considerations need to be changed for this group. So when we look at the phylogenetic tree, this is what it looks like. It's kind of confusing. You have polychaetes over here. You also have them here. You also have them here. So these guys need to be reclassified clearly. The Clitellates and Siboglinidae, we need to talk about that Siboglinidae group and figure out, are they truly a sister group to Clitellates? So there's lots of things that are going on. Again, like I say, Oligochaetes and Hirudinea are now lumped into this group. They used to be split off, so you'd have multiple branches coming off of this. I'm not sure if that's going to be revisited or not, but like I said before, the phylogenetic tree of annelids is messy at best. It needs a lot more research to go into this, not just genetic research, but morphology, physiology, fossil evidence need to go into this to kind of get this teased out and make it a easier transition, and to show the connectiveness between annelids and molluscans. You kind of need to figure this out, because some of these groups of worms are very similar or have very similar features to molluscans, and so show that interconnectedness between annelids and mollusca. Okay, so with that, we're going to move now into a new group. We're going to talk about echidozans, or organisms that can shed their exoskeleton. Okay, and we're going to start talking about arthropods. Okay, we're going to start talking about the insects eventually. Okay, or we're going to talk about what normally is considered the invertebrate groups. Okay, all right. So next time, echidoza.